Hey, I'm still alive. Welcome back. It is time for us to review Dragon's Dogma 2. Now, there have been plenty of upgrades and modernization, that is certainly the case. However, Dragon's Dogma 2 still bears many of the quirky features and design choices of its predecessor, for better and for worse. It's got an action combat system, which I have felt to be quite satisfying, with chunky hits, great sounds and animations, and an interesting variety of classes and abilities to pick from. No matter which vocation I've played thus far, plowing through hordes of enemies and tackling the game's many behemoths has felt great. But also, combat lacks the variety of contextual attacks that most action games have adopted nowadays, as it limits you to just 2 basic attacks and 4 skills, has no lock-on top of no universal blocking or dodging, as those defensive capabilities are restricted to certain vocations only. The game has a fairly large, handcrafted, and beautifully built open world with tons of winding paths, hidden treasures, points of interest, discoveries, and enemies around nearly every corner. At no point while playing did I ever feel like I was walking through filler content. Any direction you go, you're bound to wind up finding something interesting or worthwhile. But no doubt encouraged by exploring this space, it also has extremely limited fast travel. You are only able to port to a select few locations, and doing so requires the use of a very rare consumable that you'll occasionally find while looting or can purchase from certain vendors for a considerable chunk of change. The result of which is most of the time you play, you're going to be hoofing it on foot if you are not taking an ox cart. Your AI companions, the pawns, are thoroughly fleshed out, interesting, and much more than just allies in combat. They'll help act as guides to your current quest objective. They'll gather resources and craft consumables. They'll point out the location of hidden chests and collectibles nearby, all while also, yes, supporting you in combat as you choose from a rotating variety of player-built pawns, selecting them based on their class, vocation, but also on their mannerisms, their inclinations, knowledge, and the particular active and passive skills that they're using. But at the same time, while you're on a quest, you're bound to hear the same voice line 20 times en route. Their interactions and capabilities don't always seem to function as intended, and while funny at times, they also sometimes make decisions in combat that'll leave you scratching your head. Like, it was a great idea to knock that goblin off of the edge into a pit, but did you have to follow them into the pit as well? So as a bit of foreshadowing, I'll just say right here, I like Dragon's Dogma 2 a lot. I've enjoyed my time playing the game, but it certainly does have its issues, and I expect it to be a fairly divisive title. In fact, I would say if you liked Dragon's Dogma, you'll probably like Dragon's Dogma 2. But if you didn't like Dragon's Dogma, I don't think this sequel will be doing much to change your mind. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, well, let me see if I can paint a clear picture and give you a better idea of what this game is all about. So in Dragon's Dogma 2, you play as the Arisen, a fabled character, heart taken by a dragon, destined to lead the army of pawns and the people of its lands. Problem is that when the game begins, an imposter sits on the throne, holding your place, and you find yourself locked away at a work camp. A prison warden approaches your cell and demands you reveal yourself, which means the usual first order of business in any RPG. It is now time to decide how you look. Dragon's Dogma 2 gives a ton of freedom here, with one of the better character creators that I've used in a while. If you've not seen them yet, people have made some pretty impressive lookalikes of characters from various games and other media. Lots of options here with sliders for fine-tuning things to your exact specification, or you can just select from a handful of pre-builts, whichever you prefer. After making your character, you are then put to work moving some rocks around before things quickly go awry. Medusa makes an appearance out of nowhere. Dealing with her and escaping the camp act as a brief tutorial before sending you off to start the adventure, at which point you are literally plummeted into the start of the game and sent on a mission to usurp the false Arisen, explore the world, and ward off any of its many threats. Set in motion from here is a chain of events that have you following one major quest to another, uncovering the mystery and revealing more of the game's story. All the while, you will be exploring its vast and vastly interesting open world. Now, when you hear open world game, oftentimes this might give the impression of a space that you can freely move around, heading in any direction. Well, that is definitely not the case here. While there are a fair few large fields and openly explorable areas, for the most part, Dragon's Dogma 2 is made up of many narrow and winding paths that are all interconnected with obstacles on every side. Oftentimes, if you are trying to get to a certain location, usually there's only 1 or 2 ways of actually getting there. This is mostly due to the fact that much of the terrain in the game cannot be freely scaled wherever you like. So we're talking about things like you might be walking down a path with tight corridors surrounded by these rock walls, and you see a chest up high high, but the only way to actually get to that chest is by climbing one single narrow path that's off to the side, and you gotta find it first. There will be large rivers and bodies of water that you literally can't cross, because if you're submerged in water for more than a second, these purple tendrils known as the brine come in to pull you under and you die. So you have to walk along the water's edge until you find some sort of a bridge or a narrow gap that you can jump over. In fact, just about everywhere you go, you will find rocks, hills, trees, ravines, structures, and other things acting as impediments to free movement in any direction. Now, this was quite clearly done on purpose and as intended. Their goal here is to make a handcrafted play space that's thoroughly thought out. And by controlling where the player can and can't go, this lets them do things like create sight lines and vistas to reveal points of interest off in the distance and set up opportunities to let the player stumble into secrets. But of course, it is not stumbling. It is very much so done by design. They have clearly put much thought into how we move around this world, and I'm so glad they did, because it's been a joy to explore, and I definitely think it is one of this game's major strong suits. Everywhere you go, every move, every path is intentionally designed to lead somewhere worthwhile or reveal something worth seeing. And what sort of stuff are you going to come across while you are out exploring this world? Well, monsters for one. These are absolutely everywhere, especially when you venture further away from cities into the wilderness. You are practically tripping over groups of enemies. Goblins and bandits, saurians and zombies, skeletons and harpies, and a wide array of other fantasy creatures. Then beyond the normal ones that will come in small packs or groups, you're also going to come across many larger boss-like opponents. These are giant trolls and ogres, rock elementals, chimeras, and griffins, just to name a few. The small enemies you will be smashing through with relative ease. The bosses take a bit more thought and planning, including having to trip them, mounting and searching for weak spots, or hacking away at body parts as you work through several health bars and try to navigate their many dangerous attacks. Besides monsters, you're going to see a lot of caves and dungeons. Most of the time, these will be inhabited by a number of enemies. These locations are also pretty much what you expect. You find the entrance, you go in, you move through some corridors, take out the enemies, and collect the loot. You'll also sometimes encounter puzzles, obstacle courses that require jumping and avoiding deadly objects. There'll be rooms hidden behind hidden doors or stacks of crates. You'll find plenty of treasure chests. Some of the caves and dungeons will be linked to quest, others are simply there for the sake of exploration. Either way, this is an RPG staple that's expected, and they've done a nice job of delivering on it. Pretty much any opportunity I get to be in a dark dungeon and use the lamp on my hip in this game, I welcome, because I love that experience. Also, while exploring, you'll find a lot of loot, resources, and collectibles as you move through the world on whatever quest or mission you happen to be doing. You're going to come across all manner of things to pick up. These will be items found in piles of rubbish, chests that are filled with valuables inside, resources like plants, sticks, ores, and herbs, all used and combined for crafting. You'll find upgrade materials and a wide range of different kinds of consumables. There are also special currencies and collectibles, such as the Seeker's tokens, 240 of these in the game, in fact, hidden all throughout in all sorts of places. Once collected, these can be turned in for valuable rewards at any of the guild halls in the game. There are, of course, plenty of different major points of interest. Now, the real standout ones are actually marked with this banner icon. You'll see it on the map. These are areas of some significant importance and are definitely always worth checking out. This can include things like specific buildings, ruins, or towns. You'll see abandoned camps, sacred spots in the wilderness, caverns and coves. Whatever it is, if you see one of these marked locations with this banner icon, you definitely want to give it a look, as they are likely to contain valuable loot or even NPCs that might have quest or something else to offer you. There's also these statues scattered all the way around the world. These are used to reveal hidden secrets, though I don't want to spoil too much here. And while exploring, you're also going to come across these abandoned campfires all throughout the wilderness. So long as you have a camping kit in your inventory, this will let you set up a spot to rest. Resting is used to pass the time, moving from daytime into nighttime or vice versa. It also replenishes all of your health and recovers your maximum HP. Plus, you can cook food here and grilling meat at a campfire, which grants temporary boosts to various stats. And in fact, the campsites are part of this game's push and pull, the adventuring mechanics in Dragon's Dogma 2, as you need to replenish your max HP that is lost in battle. But then also, you're going to be often heading back to town whenever your inventory fills up, as the game does restrict carrying capacity with these weight limits, and the weight of the items in your pack will also impact your sprinting speed and stamina recovery. It's definitely one of those games where you are preparing to go out and adventure, you kill things, you collect things, but then the different restrictions of your carry capacity and of your reduced maximum HP be, they force you to retreat and fill yourself back up. Those are some of the highlights of what you can expect to see and encounter while playing the game, while out exploring, and all of this stuff, because of its handcrafted nature, the world of Dragon's Dogma 2 has really felt like an actual place. They've really done a great job of crafting this world, and that has made exploration all the more enjoyable. Couple this with the game's day-night cycle, how they use light in the darkness, the weather patterns, and some generally good audio. This has been one of the more immersive games that I've played in a while. It feels like I'm actually on a fantasy adventure, going out and exploring this medieval themed world, and I absolutely love it. Also playing into this exploration is how traversal works. Now, as mentioned, you're going to be spending most of your time running around on foot. In general, I think moving your character around, exploring the environment, mantling up, jumping, sliding, grappling, all of these things feel pretty good. And as I said, you're going to mostly be walking around. That's because fast travel is limited to 2 forms. So there are ox carts found in major towns. These come on a schedule and will take you to one specific destination for a small fee. Once you're aboard an ox cart that's headed to a destination, you've got the option of dozing off, at which point you'll wake up once you arrive, or if you happen to be attacked by monsters en route, you'll have to fend them off before continuing. The other form of fast travel are the port crystals. So using these things called fairy stones, you can travel to any port crystal in the game. However, these locations are few, quite limited, with port crystals only found in particular cities and towns. Eventually, you are able to place down your own in other locations, but the real restriction here isn't the number of port crystals that you can teleport to. It's the fact that the fairy stones are consumed upon use. So these will be found as you play the game. You'll loot them, but they are quite rare. In fact, I think I found maybe 10 fairy stones in my first 20 hours playing the game. These can be purchased as well from specific vendors in various towns, but they cost a small fortune as far as I could tell. Bottom line is that both of the fast travel methods are fairly restrictive, which resulted in me a majority of the time running around on foot. All right, now let's talk about combat. Dragon's Dogma 2 features action combat, but it is bucking the trend of Souls-like route that most modern-day action games seem to use. Instead, this game follows in the footsteps of its predecessor with more of an old-school action combat system. So you do have 2 basic attacks and a class ability. Each of these will be different depending on your selected vocation, but essentially this tends to mean a light and heavy attack as well as some sort of a defensive skill. Then, as you play the game, you accumulate this special currency while engaged in combat that you will then use to unlock new core skills, weapon skills, and these passives that are called augments. The culmination of which is 6 attacks, 1 class skill, and the ability to grab, and that in a nutshell is all of your combat capabilities. So each vocation also comes with its own unique mechanic that adds a little bit of further depth to the class. So for example, currently I'm playing as a warrior vocation who uses a large, slow, heavy-hitting 2-handed weapons, which includes many attacks that can be held and charged up for increased damage. While charging, warriors become a little tankier, letting them withstand hits a little better. Also, the vocation skill is the barge, which is the shoulder bash that acts as a quick follow-up to an attack and can also open up for counters. But notably, playing as the warrior vocation, I do not have access to a dodge, block, or parry. Because of all of this, survival and combat for most of the game's vocations centers around positioning and avoiding attacks whenever possible. Everyone also has the ability to grab, which allows you to pick up and throw objects like rocks, explosive barrels, or even smaller enemies, or the grab can be used to cling onto larger enemies, letting you move to certain weak points or limbs. However, I did feel like the combat felt really satisfying to use, as limited as it might be when compared to other modern-day action combat games. Another thing that helps out in combat are your companions, known as the pawns. Pawns are companions created and customized by real players. So early on, you yourself will make a single pawn who acts as your primary ally with you throughout the entire adventure. You'll customize their look, pick their vocation, and also choose their behavior. But also, you can hire 2 additional pawns to join your party from a wide array of those created by other real players. Pawns come in all manner of variety and combination, so there are 6 different vocations that pawns can be. These include the fighter, the archer, thief, mage, warrior, and sorcerer. Just like you, other players will pick pick a class for their pawn. Then as the pawns level, you are unlocking and equipping new active and passive skills depending on which 4 weapon skills you want them to have. Pawns can also come in different inclinations. This will impact their behavior and speech both in and out of combat. There are 4 of these. Kind-hearted has them prioritizing support, holding down foes and buffing allies. Calm pawns will focus on survival, defense, and evasion. Simple pawns are observant. In particular, out of combat, they're focused on gathering items and pointing out interesting objects. And then there are straightforward pawns who scout enemies from afar and tend to be quite aggressive in combat. On top of their inclinations, you can also have pawns with specializations. The Forager specialization has a pawn marking the location of enhancement materials seen around the map. There are also pawns that can learn various special unique languages like Elvish, or pawns that will use potions and curatives on both you and your allies in combat. Tons of specializations, inclinations, and the vocations. Between all of this, there's just so much variety on offer for not only your main pawn, but also the 2 additional pawns you select to join your party. Speaking of which, you summon pawns at these things called rift stones. These will be found in most major towns, but you'll also see them while out exploring. You'll come across these abandoned stones that, when repaired, let you search for new pawns that are different from those found in towns. And even after you've added pawns to your party, you are able to dismiss them and summon new ones at any time at any rift stone you come across, if there are ones who are better suited for your current class makeup or to deal with some sort of an upcoming challenge. And one of the coolest things about the pawn system is the fact that your pawn can be then hired out by other players, and they go out on adventures, they learn things, they complete quests, and they pull that knowledge and bring it back to you to take advantage of in your own game, to learn how to better deal with certain bosses, or learn how to discover the location of certain quests, or search for certain treasure chests in a vicinity that those pawns have already come across. It is such a cool system. I really think the pawn system is one of this game's many strong suits. A couple other things I want to cover here just as a basic overview. So there's all sorts of different items you'll come across in the game. You've got consumables like curatives for healing and doing various buffs, as well as specialty items like the fairy stones and wake stones and other things that can be used as gifts or have much utility to them. You're going to find tons of raw resources while out exploring. Those are used and can be combined to craft the game's various consumables. All sorts of upgrade materials used for enhancing your weapons and armor. Tons of different weapons. There's a variety of ranged, magical, one-handed, and two-handed melee. Armor with various slots for the helm, chest, legs, and cape slot. And you'll also have rings that give various buffs to offensive, defensive, and utility capabilities such as carry capacity. Tons of different vendors you're going to come across in the game's various towns and cities. There's armory and weaponsmiths. Here you'll buy and upgrade your armor and weapons. Vendors in the different towns will have their own offerings of items, and then you'll use those upgrade materials found while exploring to enhance both your armor and your weapons, with up to 3 upgrades available for each. There are general goods and alchemy vendors that sell potions, gear, and other materials. You'll find pubs and inns. Sometimes these will be combined, other times they're separate. Inns in particular are where you go to store items as well as sleep to pass the time and recover your max HP. There are the vocation guilds. Here you will learn new active and passive abilities as you level up your class as well as your pawn's vocation. You can also change vocations here at any time so long as you have learned it. There are oracles which offer hints and suggestions for your currently active quest. Great to use if you happen to be stumped. You'll find salons and barberies which can be used to change your appearance, and a handful of other specialty NPC vendors with things that I don't really want to spoil for you at this time. All right, so that pretty much does it as the general overview. That encompasses most of the major features and systems without spoiling too much of the game for you. Now let's go ahead and move into what I liked and what I didn't. So top of the likes for me is actually the combat, believe it or not. While it is limited to only 6 attacks, less if you have any weapon abilities that are buffs that you use, which was the case for me, I still found combat overall to be quite satisfying. I think especially the focus on positioning as opposed to relying on spamming dodge rolls or spamming block or spamming parry. You don't really spam parry technically, but you know, in a lot of action games, it feels like it devolves into reducing your weight, spamming rolls, and attacking whenever opportunities open up. But this game really focuses on paying attention to positioning, with the fact that those defensive skills are not baked in with but a select few vocations. And I enjoyed that on top of the general satisfying feel of hitting enemies, of dealing with these behemoths, mounting monsters, getting into weak points, trying to grapple onto them and take them down, tripping them when they lose their balance. All around, the combat experience I found quite satisfying. This coupled with a large density of monsters. I mean, literally, you will have fights just rolling from one into the another. You might be fighting a small group, one of them ventures off, you go to finish him off, and then all of a sudden you've aggroed one of these larger enemies and you have like a big 5 to 10 minute fight on your hand all of a sudden, and then maybe that monster's running all around and has you aggroing other groups of enemies. There's just a lot of enemies to fight in this game. As someone who enjoys the combat, that ended up being something I really liked. I also love the pawn system just in general. I think this is such a great way to handle companions and allies. I think it is so well done. The variety of pawns to be pulled from as you're trying different things, trying different party makeups and compositions, it's really, really enjoyable. There's so many different things to be tailored between the vocations, between their inclinations and their specialties, but then not all vocations are the same because you're selecting 4 of those weapon skills from a long list of skills that you unlock as you level up. It means that many different pawns of the same vocations, inclinations and specializations aside, they can be and play quite different. And then on top of that, you're adding in the fact that they've got different weapons and different equipment and different rings that provide different buffs. There's just so much variety here. And then just also the pawns and their personalities I enjoy, with regular quips here and there, post-battle celebrations like your pawns putting out their hand to have a high five after an intense fight. Pawns also do a lot of silly stuff that made me laugh. Like at one point I had a ranger pawn who was just randomly started picking off barrels as he was shouting, "I can't wait to see what's inside these barrels." Like, it's just the pawns are really, really interesting. It's a really fun system to play with. I also came across plenty of really funny and interesting moments. So for example, the game uses ragdoll physics when you get taken out, and this created some hilarious moments in fighting. At one point I was fighting one of the minotaurs and they just yeeted me way up high in the sky, slamming me into the side of the mountain. I literally burst out laughing. I thought it was so funny. We had the Cyclops attack one of the major towns and you had to fight it with the help of a bunch of guards. It was actually interesting, kind of ragdolling all over the place. We also found a Cyclops next to a ravine at some point, and then as it was dangling there, you can knock it down, it would fall into the ravine, and then there were boulders set up on a hill that you could break the barrier holding it, and dropping the boulders down into the Cyclops or into the enemies beyond the Cyclops. Just the game sets up a lot of interesting cool things, coupled with the physics, coupled with the pawns, and sort of all the quirkiness around all of that. A lot of funny and interesting moments that I came across. I would say the quest, while there are some downside to the system, I do like that it feels more dynamic and involved than a lot of other RPG games. It isn't simply kill quest or fetch quest or talk to an NPC quest. There's a lot of interesting things and a lot of you having to figure stuff out and intuit what it is you need to do next, as the game doesn't straight up tell you where to do and what to go. I like the environmental traversal. As I mentioned, the game has a lot of set paths, and this creates a great sense of exploration as you're trying to discover how to get from one place to the other. I also just think character movement in general feels good. Walking around, your character grabbing and pulling themselves up, shimmying down inclines, scrambling up obstacles, moving your character around the world feels really great. The visuals and atmosphere really grew on me. At first, I wasn't sure how I felt about the graphical presentation of this game, but RE Engine is something that I've really grown to appreciate, especially its use of light and darkness. Hands down, I love the nighttime in this game when you are basically forced to use your lamp because it's so dark you can barely see, but then at the same time, you're able to spot enemies in the distance based on the light source they emit. We're talking like glowing eyes from skeletons, zombies, and ghosts, or torches that are carried by bandits and goblins. It's just nighttime in this game, exploring dark dungeons and caves. It all looks really great. That also with a weather system and the day-night cycle, it's just all super immersive. Which brings me to my final, the sense of immersion and adventure in this game is top-notch. Like, really, really one of my favorite and most immersive games that I've played in some time. I think they nail it. Now let's move on to the dislikes, starting with performance. This is a big one, and it seems like it might end up affecting a lot of people. All-around performance wasn't particularly great. I never found it to be very steady. I tried a lot of different settings, but just in general, not a great time with performance. Even if it stayed somewhat steady while out in the wilderness, it always, without fail, just tanked and got super bad whenever I was in town, which, mind you, because of how the main quest line works in this game, you spend a lot of time in these large towns, and when in the large towns, at least in my experience and in Liam's experience, performance just was abysmal. It was not great. I've also heard performance is particularly bad on the consoles, although I've not tried it yet myself, and will wait for final reviews. Early impressions say that the game isn't running terribly well across the board. Another dislike is the lack of NPC reactions. So here's what I'm talking about. You can walk into someone's home and just start looting stuff without any reaction whatsoever, like not even a voice line, which all seems really odd. I would be pulling valuables from a shopkeeper's storage or gold from someone's house as they are sitting right next to me, staring right at me, and they don't mutter a word. Now, I know this is like a design choice, and I'm not saying they have to have like a theft system, but the fact that there's no reaction to what I'm doing by NPCs is very, very odd. In fact, at one point, Liam told me he accidentally killed an NPC, and no one around seemed to care. They didn't even say anything. They were like, oh, why did you do that? They just, no reaction whatsoever. I don't need there necessarily to be like a thievery system, a bounty system or whatever, but to have some sort of reaction to the fact that I'm like pulling someone's valuables out of their storage chest while they're sitting on a chair staring at me, and for them to say nothing just feels a little odd, is what I'm saying. While the pawns make me laugh and I have enjoyed a lot of their quips and lines, they really lack variety here and tend to repeat the same things over and over again. This is especially true when you're on a quest. So as you go out questing, you have an objective, right? In the process, you'll come across enemies and you'll fight. Now, while you're fighting, you're gonna be toggling between the pawn commands, which are go or be aggressive, help, assist me, or wait, right? Those are the 4 pawn commands you can issue. So as the fight ensues, you're going to be swapping between them. You'll say go for them to attack the enemies. You'll say help if you need to heal or for them to pick you up when you get down. And you'll say assist me or come to me if you want them to kind of fight in a cluster directly near you. But when the fight is done, you're going to issue that go command again. And what that does is it tells your main pawn or your quest guide pawn to start leading you towards your next quest objective. And when they do that, they literally repeat the same line over and over again. So you're on a quest, and when you say go, your pawn's gonna say a couple of things like, oh, I happen to know where this thing is, follow me hither or whatever, right? And then you'll get in a fight, all the fight will happen, and then when the fight's over, the pawn's gonna say that exact same follow me to this quest objective line every single time you are done with a fight. It just gets very repetitive and quite obnoxious, to be honest. Then there's the inventory management. So you're gonna be dealing with this quite often, as you are bound to hit your maxed weight even after a short time adventuring. Even though it's spread across your 4 party members, your max capacity is going to fill up fast. In fact, the closer you get to encumbered, the slower your sprint speed and your stamina regen. So most of the time, you're actually wanting to empty your inventory as soon as possible, because the closer you get to capping out, the slower you're running and your stamina regen gets worse. So you don't want to cap out. And this means you are going back to town to sell items, to put stuff in storage very, very frequently. And that, coupled with the fact that fast travel is quite restrictive, is going to mean you're doing a lot of running just to empty your bags. Some people are going to be really bothered by that. I'd also say that the dungeon variety seems limited, mostly consisting of similar looking caverns, caves, and ruins, although the actual layouts are differ and these are unique locations. A lot of them feel similar and lack any strong distinct characteristics, which I was disappointed by. And while some quests are straightforward, many of them can be quite cryptic and convoluted, giving you no real sense of direction or objective. This was especially true for many of the main story quests revolving around one of the major cities that you'll spend several hours in throughout your playthrough. Figuring the quest out and what you need to do can be really annoying. Now, you do have the pawn assistance, you do have the oracle, but many times not even that is enough, and it can just take quite a while to even figure out what you're supposed to do. This is a feature, not a bug, but there are also bugs, and that leads me to my final dislike. We came across a few of these. Nothing necessarily game-breaking, but a few annoyances, like items being taken for a quest, but then the quest not completing, or quest just not progressing or working as intended until you happen to reload or leave and come back. I wouldn't say I've experienced a ton of these, but enough that I think it's worth noting. So to wrap it up, I will say that overall, I have really enjoyed my time with Dragon's Dogma 2. I like how it plays, the combat and movement are satisfying, I love exploring the world, it's so immersive with the day-night cycle, the use of lighting, and the attention to detail. They've definitely crafted a space that feels authentic, like a real living, breathing place. I think the pawns are interesting and fun companions. It's a cool system system to engage with. And while obscure at times, I've also appreciated that many of the game's quests are more than just the typical kill or fetch variety. At the same time, I am quite aware that some things that I've run up against while playing, some of these quirky features and design choices may very well end up being deal breakers for certain people. Not to mention the game's relatively poor performance, and I have heard it's even capped at 30 frames per second on consoles, RIP. For those reasons, along with what I would consider some pacing issues and some of the other dislikes that I mentioned, much like the original, I expect Dragon's Dogma 2 to be fairly divisive. I like the game. I found it to be quite a fun adventure and satisfying to play, but it definitely will not be for everyone. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. In fact, I think some people may very well outright hate it, but I like it, so take that for what it's worth. That does it for our review of Dragon's Dogma 2. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys in the next one.